Great, so now we're just going to look at the socket script that's inside our client project folder. So starting right from the top, I've just left all the namespaces the same. Obviously you're going to need your Unity engine and you're going to need that networking. So I've called it sockets, that's just the class. That squirrel object is where I'm going to actually process all the data that I get. So whenever the server sends me a message, I'm going to process it in there. That just keeps the script as bare bones as possible. So a lot of the same parameters here. You're going to have a buffer size for the data you're receiving, the ID, the port, the address. It's all going to be the same. So that's your host's ID. That's the port we've been using over and over, 8899. And that is the actual IP address. And that's going to be the IP address of the server you're connecting to. So it's the same in both the client and the server version. They're both going to use that IP address that you'll get on your Google Cloud. So make sure those are the same. And then our connection ID. So whenever the client connects, you're going to get a unique ID. So this is, the server knows how to communicate with you, and they're going to send it to this ID. So we have channel 0, 1, 2, and then you see this initialize function again. So this one has to be the exact same. You can just copy and paste it. The port, the address, and all the channels have to be identical. Nothing different there. Okay, so now we move on to our connect. This here is the actual Unity connect function. So you might set it up a little differently later, but how I've done it is inside the sockets, I've created my own function, and I've just called it connect. So what this is basically going to do is just call the Unity connect function. So you start out with an error, which is a parameter it needs, just a byte. And here it's actually going to set, so whenever you connect, it's going to set your ID. And that's how that'll work. So it's going to ask for a host ID. It wants a host address, a host port, a channel, which I always just connect on 0. And I usually just set that to reliable. Then out error if there's an error. So that's going to connect you to the server, and it's going to give you your connection ID. And then disconnect, again, this is the actual Unity disconnect function, network transport.disconnect, and that wants a host ID, wants a connection ID, and an error. And yeah, so it's just a function I've created where I just call the Unity function. It's a bit easier to write disconnect than go through this every time. Okay, so we have our wake function. Same thing, you need to spool up the network, the Unity networking thing, and then you're going to want to initialize the conversation. So that's up here, you're just calling this, and now the client and the server are both on the same terms. They both have the same channels, the channels are all the same, and they both know the port and the address, those are all going to be the same. Okay, so same as the server, we're going to be receiving messages. Before we were on the server version and they were receiving messages from the client. Now it's the other way around. So this will be stuff that we get from the server. It's pretty much all the same. Host ID, connection ID, channel ID, that's all going to be the same. We're going to call this network transport receive. I think that's all the same as well. And then we're just going to go through that switch. So you could have nothing. You could have connection event. So in this case, it's going to be when we connect to the host. So I just called connected to host, so I know that I've connected. And then we have our data event. So whenever the server is going to send us something, we're going to receive it here. The buffer size, so just how big that data is. And then I use the same logic. If I receive on this channel, I'll do this thing. If I receive on a different channel, I'll do another thing. So you can have as many channels here as you want. Just make sure, obviously, that you initialize them back up here. Okay, and then after our data event, we have a disconnect event. So whenever we actually disconnect from the host or the server, it's going to just log a message that I've written in here. and that is the client version of sockets. So they're pretty similar, but there's a few differences. Mostly just these functions to connect and disconnect. Obviously the server can't connect to itself,